Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The U.S. has ordered non-essential diplomatic staff to leave Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, amidst ongoing tensions with Russia. Over a dozen countries have now called on citizens to leave Ukraine or have transferred official personnel out of Kyiv. The Biden administration says 130,000 Russian troops are amassed along Ukraine's border and warned again Sunday Russia could invade at any time. Russia continues to demand a halt to NATO's eastward expansion. Ukrainian officials, meanwhile, called for an urgent meeting with Russia to discuss the crisis. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who spoke with President Biden Sunday, repeated calls this weekend to avoid creating panic over the situation.
The best friend for enemies, that is panic in our country. And all this information that helps only for panic doesn't help us.
Thousands of demonstrators marched through Kyiv Saturday, with some rally-goers calling for peace, while others urged Ukrainians to defend themselves against Russian aggression. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is in Kyiv today before heading to Moscow for more talks, as Germany says the crisis has reached a critical point. This is Chancellor Scholz speaking Sunday.
Und deshalb ist es notwendig, klar zu sein, klar zu sagen, dass im Falle.
And that's why it's necessary to be clear, to say clearly that in the case of military aggression against Ukraine that endangers its territorial integrity and sovereignty will result in hard reactions and sanctions that we have carefully prepared and that we can put into effect immediately, together with our allies in Europe and NATO.
Vice President Kamala Harris will address the Munich Security Conference later this week to rally U.S. allies in Europe. Canadian police have reopened the Ambassador Bridge, which connects Ontario with the U.S. city of Detroit, after a weeks-long protest by Canadian truckers came to a head over the weekend. Police arrested anti-government protesters who've been blockading the international trade route for nearly a week as part of the so-called Freedom Convoy, which started as a demonstration against COVID restrictions. But protests continue in Ottawa and have now spread to other cities and countries, including France, where police fired tear gas at demonstrators in Paris Saturday. Organizers of the Canadian Truckers' Convoy have been linked to far-right hate groups. The Food and Drug Administration's postponed Pfizer's request for emergency use authorization of its COVID vaccine for children aged 6 months through 4 years old. Pfizer says a clinical trial showed 2 low doses of its vaccine had limited efficacy at preventing disease among 2 to 4-year-olds. Pfizer is now evaluating whether a 3rd dose produces a stronger immune response in young children. In other medical news, a new study finds COVID-19 can substantially increase the risk of cardiovascular disease, even in fully recovered patients with mild heart cases. The research, published in Nature Medicine, found the risk of stroke was increased by over 50%, and the risk for heart failure increased by over 70% in the year following an infection for unvaccinated people. The World Health Organization's Director General called for a waiver on intellectual property protections for COVID vaccines during a tour of a South African vaccine producer. Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus said ending the acute phase of the pandemic is within reach if 70% of the world's population is inoculated by mid-year.
It's not a matter of chance, it's a matter of choice. So if the world wants to end it, it has the means to end it. If it wants to continue to be greedy and doesn't want to end it, then it will not end.
In Afghanistan, authorities released 4 women activists over the weekend. They'd been reported missing after participating in an anti-Taliban rally in January. Separately, 2 European journalists who'd been detained while on assignment for the UN Refugee Agency were also released Friday. In other news from Afghanistan, the nation's central bank condemned President Biden's executive order Friday, which seeks to seize, then split $7 billion in U.S.-held Afghan assets between the families of 9/11 victims and humanitarian assistance for Afghanistan. The Afghan central bank said the move is, quote, an injustice to the people of Afghanistan. Aid groups also blasted the news as millions in Afghanistan face extreme poverty, hunger, and displacement. In Honduras, a group of environmental defendos from the community of Guapanol have been freed after the Supreme Court Thursday threw out a case against them. 6 people were convicted for protesting an open-pit iron oxide mine project in the northern Honduran region of Tocoa. They'd been wrongfully placed in pretrial detention since 2019. The mine's inside a national forest reserve and has polluted local rivers sacred to the community. In Brazil, deforestation in the Amazon rainforest last month rose to the highest level ever recorded for the month of January. New government data show Brazil's Amazon lost 166 square miles of rainforest, an area 7 times the size of Manhattan. Environmentalists say the deforestation is accelerating as far-right President Jair Bolsonaro faces an uphill battle for re-election in October.
Under the current government, the dismantling of Brazil's environmental protection, environmental laws, and environmental enforcement as command and control is being promoted. So this is a race. There is a race to deforest, especially the Amazon.
A federal judge has restored protections for gray wolves across much of the United States. The Trump administration had stripped the gray wolves of their Endangered Species Act protections during the final weeks of Trump's presidency. Wildlife advocates celebrated the ruling but warned more action is needed to protect wolf populations. In related news, Australia declared the koala an endangered species due to years of drought, bushfires, disease, and habitat loss. In Olympic news, 15-year-old Russian figure skater Kamala Valieva will be allowed to compete in the women's single skating competition Tuesday, even though she tested positive for a banned heart medication that can increase athletic endurance. The decision will allow Russia's Olympic Committee to keep Valieva's gold medal in last week's team event. However, Valieva won't be allowed to participate in any medal ceremonies until her case is resolved. In 2019, the World Anti-Doping Agency banned the Russian Federation from the Olympic Games and other international sporting events amidst revelations of widespread state-sponsored doping among athletes. Russian athletes can still compete in the Olympics, but Russia's flag and national anthem are prohibited at the Games. In Puerto Rico, teachers are getting a temporary $1,000 monthly salary increase, and the Puerto Rican government's committed to negotiating better retirement options for educators. This comes after thousands of teachers led several protests across the island demanding better wages, benefits, and working conditions. Puerto Rico's Governor Pedro Pierluisi promised to make the raises permanent. Protest leaders say they won't celebrate until the commitments are delivered. Puerto Rican firefighters and restaurant workers have also joined calls for salary increases and better working conditions. Restaurant waitstaff are walking out of their job today, Valentine's Day, to join another teacher-led protest. Here in New York, a suspect has been arrested in the fatal stabbing of a 35-year-old woman Sunday inside her apartment. The man had followed Christina Yuna Lee from the street into her building. Lee is the latest victim in a string of anti-Asian hate crimes in New York and around the country that have intensified since the beginning of the pandemic. Assemblymember Yulin No, who represents Lee's district, decried the mounting violence and called Sunday's killing a worst-case nightmare scenario. Lee was a Rutgers University graduate, worked for a digital music platform. In Mississippi, 2 white men have been arrested and charged in the chase and shooting of DeMontario Gibson, a 24-year-old black FedEx driver. Gibson, who survived the attack, was delivering a package on January 24th in the city of Brookhaven when the 2 white men, who he had never interacted with before, started chasing him. The pursuit lasted for about 7 minutes. In a news conference Thursday, Gibson said he believes Brandon Case and his father Gregory Case chased and shot at him because he's black and likely thought he didn't belong in the neighborhood. His attorney has called this a copycat crime of the murder of Ahmaud Arbery. This is DeMontario Gibson speaking last week about what happened.
White pickup truck starts approaching me from that house. I'm thinking they're just leaving leaving the yard just to go somewhere, but then they get like extremely close to me, start blowing the horn, so I thought I was in the way. I proceeded to try to leave the yard, and the dude or whoever was in the truck tried to cut me off. I swerved around him, and I just like started hitting the gas to try to get out of there. I didn't know what his intentions were. I drive down about 2 or 3 houses, and there's another guy standing in the middle of the road with a gun pointed at my window, and he's mouthing the words "stop," and he's doing his hands like this with the gun, "stop." I shake my head, I start hiding behind the steering wheel, hoping he don't shoot inside the van, and I swerve around him as well. When I swerve around him, he starts firing shots into my van.
In Georgia, a jury will be selected and opening arguments are expected today in the federal hate crimes trial of the 3 white men who are convicted of murdering Ahmaud Arbery. Again, a father-son team included in those 3 men. The Senate advanced a major piece of workplace legislation last Thursday that advocates say is a milestone in the Me Too movement. Passed with bipartisan support, it bans companies from forcing workers to settle sexual harassment and assault claims in forced arbitration, a usually secretive and costly process. This is New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, one of the bill's sponsors.
The bill is going to help fix a broken system that protects perpetrators and corporations and ends the days of silencing survivors. No longer will survivors of sexual assault or harassment in the workplace come forward and be told that they are legally forbidden to sue their employer because somewhere buried in their employment contracts was this forced arbitration clause. The Ending Forced Arbitration and Sexual Assault and Sexual Harassment Act will void all forced arbitration provisions for sexual assault and harassment, allowing them to have their day in court.
And Connie Hogarth, a longtime advocate for peace and social justice, has died at the age of 95. In 1974, Hogarth co-founded the group Westpac in New York's Westchester County, where she spent decades working to end racism, stop the Vietnam War, abolish the death penalty, abolish nuclear weapons, and to close the Indian Point nuclear power plant. In the 1980s, she served on the board of the National Rainbow Coalition and was active in both presidential campaigns of Reverend Jesse Jackson. Hogarth was a supporter of Palestinian rights and fought to end apartheid in South Africa. She co-founded the Climate Crisis Coalition in 2004 and worked to slow the unfolding climate catastrophe. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report.